For weeks, my son and daughter-in-law kept saying they were organizing things in the old shed. But at 3:30 that morning, I woke up to a strange noise. Through the window, I saw two figures loading dozens of heavy bags onto a pickup truck. My son's voice whispered, "Don't let the old man find out." The next morning, while they were gone, I opened the shed. What I found inside shocked me so much my heart nearly stopped. I'm truly grateful you're here with me. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Also, please note that some parts of this story include fictional elements for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but the message behind it is meaningful. The low rumble of an engine pulled me from sleep. I opened my eyes to darkness. The bedroom was cold, always cold these days, even with the heater running. November in Montana doesn't forgive you for forgetting a blanket. I blinked at the red glow of the alarm clock on the nightstand, 3:30 in the morning. Who the hell would be out here at this hour? I pushed myself up, joints creaking louder than the old floorboards, and crossed to the window. The glass was frosted at the edges, but I could see through the center, down past the bare cottonwood trees, across the snow-covered yard, all the way to the barn on the east side of the property. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, then went black. Someone had just killed their lights. My pulse picked up. I pressed closer to the glass, breath fogging the pain. A pickup truck sat idling near the barn door, exhaust curling white in the freezing air. I knew that truck. I'd seen it parked in my driveway 100 times over the years. It belonged to my son, Vincent. Let me tell you something about my life before that night. My name is Charles Donovan. I'm 68 years old, and I spent 40 years teaching Western history at Montana State University. I've seen a lot of things in my time, old letters, old photographs, old lies buried in dusty archives. But nothing prepared me for what I was about to uncover in my own backyard. This ranch, 25 acres of snow-covered pasture and pine, had been in my family for 3 generations. My wife Margaret and I raised our 2 boys here. Nathan, the younger one, still lives with me. Works as a collections manager over at the Yellowstone County Museum. Good kid. Steady. The kind of son who calls his father every evening just to check in. Vincent, though. Vincent was different. He's 38 now. Runs a real estate development company in Billings. Makes good money, or at least he says he does. Always wears a suit, always talks about deals and investors and opportunities. He married Natalie 6 years ago. She's an art dealer. Sharp as a tack, that woman. Sharp enough to cut you if you're not careful. Margaret used to worry about Vincent. Said he'd gotten too ambitious, too hungry for things that didn't matter. But I told her every father worries about his kids no matter how old they get. Margaret. God, I still can't think about her without my chest tightening. She passed 6 months ago, May 14th. They said it was an accident. She'd been out riding her horse along the North Trail, and the animal spooked. Threw her. She hit her head on a rock, gone before the ambulance even arrived. I hadn't been the same since. Neither had this house. The silence had grown heavier, like the walls themselves were mourning. I'd walk past the kitchen and remember her humming while she made coffee. I'd see her reading chair in the living room and expect her to look up with that gentle smile she always wore. But the chair stayed empty. The house stayed quiet. And every night, I lay on my side of the bed, staring at the space where she used to sleep, wondering if I'd ever stop reaching for her in my dreams. Nathan tried to help. He'd cook dinner, ask me about my day, suggest we drive into town for a beer. But grief doesn't leave just because someone offers you distraction. It sits with you. It becomes part of the furniture. Vincent, on the other hand, barely came around anymore. After the funeral, he'd shown up once or twice, always with Natalie, always in a hurry. He'd ask how I was holding up, but his eyes would be on his phone. He'd mention work, some big project, some deal that needed closing. And then he'd leave, promising to visit again soon. He never did, until tonight. I watched through the window as 2 figures climbed out of the truck. Even in the dim glow of the barn's motion sensor light, I recognized them. Vincent tall and broad-shouldered in his expensive jacket, and Natalie, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. What were they doing here? Vincent bent down and lifted something from the truck bed, a large canvas bag, the kind you'd use for hauling feed or firewood. He staggered under the weight of it. Natalie grabbed another bag smaller, but just as heavy by the looks of it. They moved quietly toward the barn door. I squinted. Vincent pulled something from his coat pocket. A key. A key to my barn. I'd never given him a key. The lock clicked. The door swung open. They disappeared inside. My hand found the windowsill fingers pressing into the cold wood. My mind raced, turning over possibilities. Maybe Vincent was storing something for his business. Maybe he'd asked Nathan for the spare key and I'd just forgotten. Maybe. The barn door opened again. This time I could see their faces more clearly. Vincent's jaw was tight, his expression grim. Natalie said something to him. I couldn't hear the words, but her tone was sharp, urgent. Then she glanced toward the house. Don't let the old man find out. I heard it clear as day. The window was cracked open just an inch. I'd forgotten to close it after airing out the room yesterday, and the winter air carried sound like a canyon echo. Don't let the old man find out. The old man, me. They hauled a second load from the truck, then a third. 3 bags in total, each one heavy enough that Vincent had to brace his legs to lift them. When they were done, he locked the barn door again, pocketed the key, and climbed back into the truck. The engine started. This time Vincent didn't turn the headlights on. He drove slowly down the gravel driveway, tires crunching through the snow until he reached the main road. Only then did the lights flicker back to life, and then they were gone. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the barn. The motion sensor light had clicked off, leaving everything dark again. My breath was still fogging the glass. My heart was still racing. What the hell had I just seen? I thought about waking Nathan, but I stopped myself. What would I even say? Your brother was here in the middle of the night, and I don't know why Nathan would just tell me I was imagining things, that I was tired, that I was still grieving Margaret and seeing shadows where there was only light. But I wasn't imagining this. I could still see the strain in Vincent's shoulders as he'd lifted those bags. I could still hear Natalie's voice cutting through the frozen air. And I could still feel the wrongness of it all, the secrecy, the late hour, the stolen key. Something was happening. Something Vincent didn't want me to know about. And the more I thought about it, the more a cold, creeping dread settled into my bones. Because if my son was hiding something from me, it wasn't just some minor business deal or a surprise renovation project. Men don't sneak onto their father's property at 3:30 in the morning for innocent reasons. I turned away from the window and sat down on the edge of the bed. The room felt colder than before. I looked at the empty side of the mattress, Margaret's side, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice. Charles, if something's wrong, you need to find out what it is. She'd always been the brave one. I rubbed my face, trying to think. Tomorrow, I'd go out to the barn. I'd see what Vincent had left there, and I'd get some answers. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the answers would destroy me. Because in 3 days, I would learn the truth. My son had ended my wife's life, and the bags in that barn held the proof. The smell of coffee pulled me back to the present. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from the mug Nathan had set in front of me. The morning light was just beginning to creep through the window, pale and cold. Outside, the snow looked blue in the early dawn. You sleep okay, Dad? Nathan stood by the counter, pouring himself a second cup. He was already dressed for work, dark slacks, a button-down shirt, his museum ID clipped to his belt. 32 years old, and he still called me every night before bed to make sure I'd eaten dinner. That's the kind of son he was. I forced a smile. Yeah, fine. He didn't look convinced. Nathan had his mother's eyes sharp, observant. But he didn't press. He just nodded, took a sip of his coffee, and grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. I've got inventory today, he said. Probably won't be home till 6. You need anything? No, I'm good. He hesitated, one hand on the doorknob. You sure? I'm sure. He gave me one last look, then stepped outside. I listened to his truck start, the tires crunching over the gravel driveway, the sound fading into the distance. When I was certain he was gone, I set down my coffee and stood. It was time to see what Vincent had left in my barn. The air outside bit at my face. Montana mornings in November don't fool around. The cold comes at you like a living thing, sharp and relentless. I pulled my coat tighter and crossed the yard, my boots leaving deep prints in the snow. The barn sat exactly where it had always sat, a low structure of weathered pine with a sloped roof that sagged a little on the east side. I'd been meaning to fix that roof for years. Margaret used to nag me about it. One of these days, Charles, that thing's going to cave in. I pushed the thought away. The barn door was solid wood, painted red decades ago, now faded to a dull rust color. I stopped in front of it and examined the lock. No scratches. No dents. No sign that anyone had forced their way in, which meant Vincent had a key I'd never given him. I pulled my own key from my pocket, the spare I kept on a ring with the house keys, and unlocked the door. It swung open with a groan, and I stepped inside. The barn smelled the way it always did, dry hay, motor oil, and old wood. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the walls, cutting the darkness into bright slices. I scanned the space. Tools hung on the walls, shovels, rakes, a rusted handsaw. In the corner sat an old tractor I hadn't started in 5 years. Saddles and bridles from when we used to keep horses, but something was different. I crossed to the back corner where we usually stacked bales of hay for winter feed. The area was clean, too clean. The concrete floor had been swept and there were no bales in sight. Instead, I saw drag marks, long, deep grooves in the dust, like someone had pulled something heavy across the floor. I crouched down, running my fingers over the marks. They were fresh, made within the last day or two. That's when I saw it. A scrap of paper tucked against the wall where the floor met the baseboard. I picked it up, unfolded it carefully. The edges were torn like it had been ripped from a notebook, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Margaret's. My chest tightened. The note was short, written in her neat, precise script. Victoria Ashford, 18 months ago, Natalie. I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Victoria Ashford. I knew that name. She was the director of the Yellowstone County Museum where Nathan worked. Margaret had worked there too for over 30 years before she retired. But what did Victoria have to do with Natalie? And why had Margaret written this? I thought back to the last few weeks before Margaret passed. She'd seemed distracted, preoccupied. One evening I'd found her sitting at her desk in the attic, hunched over a stack of papers. "What are you working on?" I'd asked. She'd looked up startled and quickly closed the folder in front of her. "Just some old museum business. Nothing important. You've been retired for 2 years, Maggie. You don't have to worry about museum business anymore." She'd smiled, but it hadn't reached her eyes. Old habits, I guess. I'd kissed the top of her head and left her to it. I should have asked more questions. I should have pushed, but I didn't. And now she was gone. I climbed the stairs to the attic slowly, my knees protesting every step. The attic had been Margaret's space, her office, her sanctuary. After she passed, I'd closed the door and hadn't opened it since. I couldn't stand to be in there, surrounded by her things, but I didn't have a choice now. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Dust hung in the air, visible in the thin light coming through the small window. Margaret's desk sat in the center of the room, covered in a fine layer of gray. Her chair was pushed back, like she'd just stood up and walked away. I crossed to the desk and sat down in her chair. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, something floral and soft. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the memory wash over me. Then I opened the drawers. Most of them held the usual things: pens, notepads, old receipts. But when I reached the bottom drawer, I felt something catch. I pulled harder, and it came free with a sharp click, a false bottom. I lifted the thin piece of wood and found a small leather notebook tucked underneath. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The notebook was bound in worn brown leather, the kind Margaret had always favored. I opened it to the first page and saw her handwriting again, neat, methodical, dated entries going back months. August 2024. Victoria hired Derek Sullivan as head of security. Something feels off about him. No prior museum experience. Where did she find him? October 2024. 2 small artifacts went missing from storage. Victoria didn't report it. Why? December 2024. Saw Natalie and Victoria together at the museum's winter gala. They acted like old friends. But Natalie never mentioned knowing Victoria before Vincent married her. Strange. February 2025. Vincent asked me about the value of certain artifacts today, specifically the Remington collection and the Sitting Bull pieces. Why would he care? He's never shown interest in Western history. April 2025. I need proof. I can't accuse anyone without proof. But I'm certain now. Something is happening. Something bad. I turned to the last page. The entry was dated May 10th, 4 days before Margaret's accident. May 10th, 2025. If someone is reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to finish what I started. Protect Nathan. Vincent and Natalie are. The sentence ended there. No period, no closing thought. Just a dash trailing off into nothing. I stared at the unfinished words, my heart pounding in my chest. Vincent and Natalie are what? I closed the notebook and set it on the desk. My mind was racing, trying to piece it all together. Margaret had been investigating something involving Vincent, Natalie, Victoria Ashford, and this Derek Sullivan, whoever he was. And she'd been scared enough to hide her notes, scared enough to write a warning. Protect Nathan. I thought about the accident. Margaret out riding her horse on the North Trail. The animal spooked. She fell. Hit her head on a rock. That's what they told me. That's what I'd believed. But now I wasn't so sure. I stood up the chair, scraping against the wooden floor. I walked to the window and looked out over the ranch. The barn sat in the distance, its red walls stark against the white snow. My wife had known something dangerous. And 4 days after writing that final entry, she was gone. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. Margaret, I whispered, what really happened to you? The question hung in the air unanswered. But deep down I already knew. This hadn't been an accident. My wife hadn't simply fallen from a horse. Someone had taken her from me. And my son was involved. The sound of tires on gravel brought me out of my thoughts. I'd been sitting in the living room for the past hour, Margaret's notebook open on my lap, reading her words over and over, trying to make sense of it all. A black pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Vincent's truck. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen my son since Margaret's funeral. He'd called a few times, but he'd been busy. Always busy. So why was he here now? I closed the notebook quickly and slid it under a couch cushion. Then I stood, letting my shoulders sag, my movements slow. If Vincent was involved in whatever Margaret had uncovered, I couldn't let him know I suspected anything. I had to play the part of the grieving old man. The front door opened and Vincent stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. His dark hair was slicked back. "Dad," he said warmly. He held up a paper bag. "I brought dinner." I forced a smile. "That's kind of you, son." He set the bag on the kitchen table and gestured for me to sit. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing." He nodded, pulling out containers of Italian takeout. "You know, Dad, I've been thinking. This place is too big for you now. Have you thought about selling, moving into town?" I took a bite of pasta, chewing slowly. "This is my home, Vincent. Your mother and I built this place together, and I understand that. But Nathan can't take care of you forever." "Nathan's doing just fine." Vincent leaned back, studying me. "Speaking of Nathan, where is he?" "At work, late shift at the museum. He came home last night though, right? I tried calling him around 10. My pulse quickened. Why was Vincent asking about last night? I slept through the night. I lied. Didn't hear him. Vincent's eyes lingered on me. Then he smiled. Good. You need the rest. We ate in uncomfortable silence. The clink of forks against plates felt unnaturally loud. I watched Vincent from the corner of my eye. His movements were controlled, deliberate. He cut his food with precision, took small bites, and smiled when our eyes met. But there was something underneath, that polished attention in his jaw, a flicker of calculation behind his gaze. This wasn't the boy I'd raised. The Vincent I knew used to laugh too loud and leave his coat wherever he dropped it. This man sitting across from me wore a mask so well fitted I almost couldn't see the seams. Almost. Finally, Vincent stood. I should get going. I walked him to the door. He paused on the porch, snow beginning to fall around him in slow, lazy flakes. The temperature had dropped again. His breath came out in white puffs. Think about what I said, about selling. I will. I watched through the window as he climbed into his truck. But instead of leaving, he stopped at the end of the driveway and pulled out his phone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his jaw was tight, his hand gripping the steering wheel. He glanced back toward the house, once said something sharp into the phone, then drove off. My son had just lied to my face, and he thought I was too old to notice. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the taillights disappear into the snowy night. My hand rested on the doorframe, fingers pressing into the cold wood. The weight of Margaret's absence settled over me again, heavier than before. She would have known what to do. She always knew. I went to my office and opened my laptop. I typed Victoria Ashford Yellowstone County Museum into the search bar. Victoria Ashford, 52, had been appointed museum director 2 years ago. Before that, she'd worked in art dealing in Denver. I clicked on an article, Local Museum Hosts Annual Charity Auction. There in the photograph stood Victoria Ashford beside a woman with dark hair. Both were smiling, champagne glasses in hand. The caption read, Museum Director Victoria Ashford with local art dealer Natalie Donovan at the 2024 Charity Gala. I stared at the screen. Natalie had never mentioned knowing Victoria, not once. But here they were, together. Margaret had been right. I picked up the notebook again and found a name scrawled at the bottom of an entry, Melissa Porter. Trustworthy, scared. I found the museum's number and called. After some persistence, I got Melissa's phone number from the receptionist. She answered on the third ring. Hello? This is Charles Donovan, Margaret Donovan's husband. Silence, then softly, Mr. Donovan, I need to talk to you. About what my wife was investigating. A pause. There's a coffee shop on Main Street. I can meet you in an hour. Thank you. The coffee shop was small and quiet. I took a table in the back corner and waited. The smell of roasted beans filled the air. A handful of college students sat hunched over laptops, earbuds in. An older couple shared a slice of pie by the window. Normal people living normal lives. I envied them. At 7 o'clock, a young woman with blonde hair tied in a ponytail stepped inside. Her blue eyes darted nervously around the room. She spotted me and sat down. Mr. Donovan, Melissa, thank you for coming. She clutched her purse tightly. I'm sorry about Mrs. Donovan. She was a good person. She was, and I think you know why I'm here. Melissa glanced over her shoulder, then leaned forward. Mrs. Donovan talked to me a few weeks before the accident. She asked me about schedules, about when Victoria Ashford and Derek Sullivan were in the building. Derek Sullivan, head of security. Mrs. Donovan thought something was wrong. She said artifacts were going missing. Do you know what she found? Melissa pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. It was a calendar, Victoria's calendar. Most entries were routine, but one stood out. November 30th, final collection. Donovan Barn, 11:45 p.m. 3 days from now. What does that mean? I asked. I don't know, but I think they're using your barn to store something. I stared at the date. My hands began to tremble. I pressed them flat against the table to steady them. "Melissa, you need to stay safe. Don't tell anyone we talked." She nodded, tears in her eyes. Mrs. Donovan tried to protect me. I owe it to her. She'd be proud of you. Melissa stood, glancing one more time toward the door, then slipped out into the night. I left money on the table and walked out. I drove home through the dark, gripping the steering wheel. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes swirling in the headlights. The roads were slick. The world felt like it was closing in. They were using my barn, and in 3 days, they planned to move whatever they'd hidden there. But I couldn't wait 3 days. The house was dark when I pulled in. Nathan wasn't home yet. I sat in the truck for a moment, engine idling, staring at the barn through the windshield. The motion sensor light flickered on, illuminating the door. I could see the padlock hanging from the latch, the same one that had been there for years. Except now I knew Vincent had a key. I shut off the engine and climbed out. The cold bit into my face. Snow crunched under my boots. My breath came in short clouds. I walked slowly across the yard, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the barn, I pulled out my own key, the master key Margaret had insisted we keep in the kitchen drawer just in case. My hands shook as I fitted it into the lock. The padlock clicked open. I pulled the door wide and stepped inside. The barn was dark, the air thick with the smell of old wood and dust. I fumbled for the light switch and flipped it on. A single bulb overhead flickered to life, casting long shadows across the floor. And there in the corner were the bags. 3 large canvas bags, exactly as I'd seen Vincent and Natalie carry them in. I walked over, knelt down, and unzipped the first one. Inside were objects wrapped in cloth, carefully, meticulously. I pulled one out and unwrapped it. It was a ceremonial pipe, intricately carved. Old. Native American by the look of it. I unwrapped another. A beaded dress. Another. A stone tool. These weren't just artifacts. These were priceless pieces of history. Stolen. My son had turned my barn into a storage facility for stolen goods. I sat back on my heels, staring at the bags. My chest felt tight. My hands were shaking again. I thought of Margaret, how she'd spent her last weeks chasing this truth. How she'd written it all down. How she'd tried to protect me. And now I understood why Vincent had been so insistent about me selling the ranch. He didn't want me here. He didn't want me to find out. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. The bags, the artifacts, the barn. Then I stood, zipped the bags closed, and walked back to the house. Tonight I would go out there. I would see what Vincent and Natalie had hidden, and I would find out the truth, no matter what it cost me. But now I knew, and knowing was the most dangerous thing of all. The barn was darker than I remembered. I stood just inside the door, my breath clouding in the freezing air. Past 11 now, and the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. I pulled the door shut and clicked on the small flashlight from my pocket. The beam cut through darkness, illuminating dust and the skeletal shapes of old tools. The barn smelled like hay and motor oil, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it held secrets. I moved toward the back corner where I'd seen the drag marks. My boots were soft on the concrete, but every sound seemed too loud. When I reached the corner, I grabbed the edge of the large canvas tarp and pulled it back. Wooden crates, canvas bags, all stacked carefully, hidden like treasure. I opened the first crate with shaking hands. Inside was a painting, gilded frame, unmistakable. I'd seen photographs of this piece in Margaret's museum catalogs. A Dash for the Timber by Frederick Remington, $1.8 million. The next container held 2 items, a ceremonial war club and a carved pipe, both with intricate beadwork. Sitting Bull's personal collection. 1.2 million. I kept moving. A ghost dance shirt. A Cheyenne war shirt covered in tiny glass beads. A crow headdress with eagle feathers. And at the bottom of one crate, gold nuggets, dozens of them gleaming in the flashlight beam. I did the math, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. $4.8 million. All stolen from the museum. All hidden in my barn. By my son. I was photographing when I heard the engine outside. My blood turned to ice. I killed the flashlight and shoved my phone into my pocket. The barn went dark. I stumbled backward, pressing myself behind a stack of hay bales. The barn door opened. Light flooded in. 2 figures stepped inside, Vincent and Natalie. "We need to move faster," Vincent said, his voice tight. "The final pickup is in 3 days. Nah, Derek's ready." Natalie's voice was calm. "He's been setting up Nathan to take the fall. Access codes, fingerprints, everything points to him." I held my breath. "What if Nathan figures it out?" Vincent asked. "He won't. Besides, your mother didn't figure it out until it was too late." Silence. "Don't talk about her," Vincent said, his voice cracking. "Why not?" "It's the truth. She was investigating the missing items. She had notes, timelines. If we hadn't acted when we did, she would have gone to the police. She was my mother, and she was going to ruin everything," Natalie snapped. "The accident looked real. The horse spooked, she fell, hit her head. No one suspected a thing." Vincent turned away. "I never wanted it to go that far. But you did it anyway. And now we finish what we started. 3 more days, then we're free." I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I managed to open the voice recorder and hit record. "What about my father?" Vincent asked quietly. "What about him? He's been asking questions." Natalie laughed. "Your father's an old man. He's grieving. He's not going to figure anything out. He's smarter than you think." "Maybe, but he's alone, tired, and heartbroken. People like that don't ask hard questions." She checked her watch. "Come on, we need to get back." They turned toward the door. My elbow brushed against something. The flashlight rolled off the crate with a soft thunk hitting the floor. Natalie froze. "What was that?" Vincent turned. "I don't know. There's someone here. It's nothing, probably a rat." "Vincent, this place is old. It's full of rats." He stepped toward the door. "Let's go." Natalie stared into the darkness. For a moment I thought she'd find me. I pressed harder against the hay bales, then Vincent grabbed her arm. "We're leaving, now." She nodded. They walked out and the barn door closed. The lock clicked. Their truck started and faded into the distance. Silence. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, my legs gave out. I sank to the floor and pulled out my phone with trembling hands. The recording was still running. I stopped it and hit play. Natalie's voice. "Your mother didn't figure it out until it was too late." Vincent's voice. "The accident looked real. The horse spooked, she fell." I listened twice. Then I couldn't anymore. My son had ended Margaret's life. Not Natalie, not Derek. Vincent. He'd been part of it. He'd known. He'd agreed. And 6 months later, he sat at my table and lied to my face. Tears burned against my cold skin. For 40 years, I'd taught history wars, betrayals, families torn apart by greed. But I never thought it would be my family. My son. I sat on the barn floor until my body went numb. Then slowly I stood. I had a recording, photographs, evidence. But I also had a choice. I could take this to the police. Vincent would be arrested, tried, convicted. He'd spend his life behind bars. Or I could protect him, bury the evidence, pretend I'd never seen anything. Let him go free. Let Margaret's life mean nothing. I stared at the phone in my hand. "What do I do?" Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. "You do what's right, Charles. No matter how much it hurts." I closed my eyes. Tomorrow I would make my decision. But tonight all I could do was stand in the darkness and grieve for the son I'd already lost. The morning light came through the kitchen window, pale and cold, the kind of Montana winter morning that made the world feel fragile. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee. I hadn't touched my phone in my hand. I had not slept. The recording from last night played in my mind, on a loop, my son's voice, Natalie's words, the confession that my wife had not died in an accident. I dialed James Caldwell at 8 o'clock. James had been our family lawyer for 25 years, a steady man with gray hair and a calm voice that never rose even when the news was bad. When I told him I needed to see him immediately, he did not ask questions. He simply said, 10 o'clock, my office. I arrived early. The law office was downtown Billings, a brick building with wood paneling and framed diplomas on the walls. The receptionist recognized me and waved me through. James met me in a small conference room with a view of the street below where the first snow of the season was beginning to fall. I handed him my phone and played the recording. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. His fingers were steepled in front of him, the way they always were when he was thinking hard. When it ended, he set the phone down carefully on the polished table. Charles, this is evidence of theft and possibly something far worse. You need law enforcement involved. I know, I said. My voice sounded hollow. But Vincent is my son. James looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were kind, but firm. And Margaret was your wife. He picked up his office phone and made a call. 10 minutes later, Detective Lauren Matthews walked in. She was 42, Montana State Police Specialized Theft Unit. She wore a dark jacket over a pressed white shirt and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much, but still cared deeply about her work. Her handshake was firm. James played the recording again. Matthews listened, took notes in a small leather notebook, then looked at me with sharp green eyes. Mr. Donovan, how long have you suspected your son? Since 3:30 yesterday morning, I said. I saw him and his wife loading bags into a truck. I found the artifacts hidden in my barn last night. That's when I recorded this conversation. She nodded slowly. We've been watching the Yellowstone County Museum case for months. Small items disappearing, no forced entry, no alarms triggered. Classic inside job. Your son's name came up in our initial investigation, but we had no proof. This changes everything. What do you need from me? I asked. Matthews leaned forward, her elbows on the table. We need you to help us catch them in the act. According to your earlier notes and the information we've gathered, there's a planned event on November 30th at 11:45 p.m. in your barn. We want you to wear a wire, a small recording device, and confront them directly. Get them to confess on record. When you say the code phrase, Margaret deserves to know the truth, we move in with the full team. I felt my chest tighten. The room suddenly felt too small. You want me to face my son, look him in the eye, and pretend I don't know what he's done? No, she said quietly. I want you to tell him the truth, that his mother deserved better, that you deserve better. The wire is just insurance, so we have admissible evidence for the prosecutor. I thought of Margaret. The last time I saw her alive, she had been standing in the yard in the late afternoon sun, arms crossed, looking at the mountains to the west. She had turned to me and said, "Don't let the truth get buried, Charles. No matter what happens, promise me you won't let them bury it." I had not understood then. I thought she was talking about some historical project, some museum dispute. I did now. I'll do it, I said. Matthews outlined the plan in detail. I would stay on the property, act normal, maintain my daily routine. On the evening of the 30th, I would wait for Vincent and Natalie to arrive. Officers would be stationed in the hills and trees around the barn, dressed in dark clothing, completely invisible. I would wear a small recording device clipped under my shirt, no bigger than a button. When I spoke the code phrase, they would move in with lights and sirens. It's not without risk, Matthews warned. Her voice was steady but serious. If Vincent realizes what's happening, he may react unpredictably. We'll do everything we can to keep you safe, but you need to understand there are no guarantees in a situation like this. James put a hand on my shoulder. Charles, you don't have to do this. We can pursue other legal avenues. No, I said. I do have to do this. For Margaret. Matthews stood and extended her hand again. We'll be in touch tomorrow to finalize the details and fit you with the equipment. In the meantime, act normally. Don't let on that anything has changed. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Vincent. His voice was smooth, casual, the way it always was when he wanted something. Hey, Dad, I've been thinking. How about we finalize those property papers? I can come by on the 29th. Get everything signed before the holiday rush hits. The 29th, one day before the trap. Sure, I said, keeping my voice steady, forcing myself to sound tired and old. Come by whenever you like. Great. I'll bring the documents. See you then, Dad. I hung up and stared out the window at the snow falling over the ranch. 3 days. 3 days until Vincent walked into my barn with stolen artifacts and lies on his lips. 3 days until I had to choose between protecting my son and honoring the memory of my wife. Was Vincent planning to get rid of me before the 30th? Was the property paperwork just a setup to remove me from the equation? Or was he simply tying up loose ends, thinking I was too old and too tired to notice what was happening right under my nose? I didn't know, but I would be ready. Nathan's truck pulled into the drive at 8 o'clock. I heard the engine cut, heard the door slam, heard his boots on the porch steps. I was sitting in the kitchen with the lights on waiting. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. He came in carrying his thermos and lunch bag, still wearing his museum badge on a lanyard around his neck. His face was tired, but peaceful. He had no idea what I was about to tell him. Hey, Dad, he said. Then he saw my face. What's wrong? No, sit down, I said. He did, slowly setting his things on the table. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the beginning of worry. I took a breath and told him everything. The night I saw Vincent and Natalie loading the bags at 3:30 in the morning. The artifacts hidden in the barn worth nearly $5 million. The recording of their confession, the words that confirmed what Margaret had suspected before she died. Her notebook with the timeline, the warnings she had written, the plan with Detective Matthews, the wire I would wear in 2 days to catch my own son. Nathan listened without moving. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. When I finished, he stood up suddenly and drove his fist into the wall beside the refrigerator. The drywall cracked. Blood appeared on his knuckles, bright against his skin. Nathan, he ended her, Nathan said. His voice broke on the words. Vincent ended our mother. And he let us believe it was an accident. He let us grieve, thinking it was just bad luck, just a terrible day. Yes, I said quietly. Nathan sank back into the chair and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. I reached across the table and gripped his wrist, feeling his pulse racing under my fingers. We sat like that for a long time, the only sound in the room, his ragged breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. I'm going with you. On the 30th. I'm going to be there when you confront him. No! Dad, you can't face him alone. I won't be alone. Detective Matthews will have a team in position around the barn. You'll be too close to this, Nathan. If something goes wrong, if Vincent realizes what's happening and things turn dangerous, I need you safe. I need you to take care of Emma and Lucas if something happens to me. They've already lost their grandmother. They can't lose their grandfather, too. Don't say that. I have to say it. I tightened my grip on his wrist. You're the good one, Nathan. You always have been. You remind me of your mother every single day. The way you care about people, the way you do the right thing, even when it's hard. I need you to stay out of this. Promise me. He pulled his hand away and wiped his face with the back of his hand. Do you hate him? Do you hate Vincent? I thought about that question for a long moment. I thought about the boy Vincent had been the one who helped me fix fences in the summer and rode horses with Margaret on Sunday mornings. I thought about the man he had become, the one who put money and ambition above everything else, even family. I hate what he did, I said. I hate the choices he made. I hate that he looked at his mother and saw an obstacle instead of the woman who gave him life. But he's still my son. I can't just turn that off. Nathan stared at me. I don't know if I can say the same. You don't have to, not yet, maybe not ever. I left him in the kitchen and climbed the stairs to Margaret's room. I had not been inside since the week after she passed. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The bed was made with the blue quilt her mother had given us as a wedding present. Her reading glasses were on the nightstand beside a book she would never finish. The wedding photo of us stood in a wooden frame on the dresser, Margaret in white, me in a dark suit. Both of us young and smiling in front of the courthouse in Billings. We had been married by a judge on a Tuesday afternoon in spring. I picked up the frame. My hands were shaking. I'm going to make this right, I said to the photograph. I don't know what it's going to cost me. I don't know if I'll lose him forever, but I'm going to get justice for you, even if it means losing our son. The photo did not answer. But I felt something loosen in my chest, some knot I had been carrying since May, since the day they told me Margaret was gone. I set the frame down carefully and went outside. The night was cold and clear. Stars filled the sky above the ranch, more than you could ever see in a city, scattered across the darkness like diamonds. I walked across the yard to the grove of pines where we had buried Margaret. The grave was simple, a granite stone with her name, the years of her life, and a line from a poem she loved. She walks in beauty like the night. I knelt in the snow. My knees were instantly wet and cold, but I didn't care. I put my hand on the stone. It was smooth and freezing under my palm. On 2 more days, I whispered. 2 more days, and I'll make him answer for what he did to you. I promise you, Margaret. I promise. The wind moved through the pines, making them whisper. I stayed there until I couldn't feel my knees anymore, until the cold had worked its way through my jeans and into my bones. Then I stood slowly and walked back to the house. My phone was ringing when I stepped inside. I looked at the screen. Vincent, I answered. Hello? Hey, Dad. His voice was cheerful, but there was something underneath it, something sharp and watchful. Quick question, why were you meeting with James Caldwell this morning? My blood went cold. How did you know about that small-town dad? People talk. Someone saw your truck outside his office. So what was it about? Are you updating your will or something? I forced my voice to stay steady, forced myself to sound old and tired. Just routine paperwork. Nothing you need to worry about. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Okay. Well, I'll see you on the 29th. Don't forget. I won't. He hung up. I stood in the hallway, staring at the phone in my hand. Had the plan been exposed? Did Vincent know what I was planning? Was someone watching me, reporting back to him? Or was he just fishing, trying to figure out if I suspected anything? 2 days. I had 2 days to hold myself together. 2 days to keep him from knowing the truth. I wasn't sure I could do it. I forced myself to take a breath before I answered him. Just updating my will, Vincent. At my age, these things matter. James has been after me for months to get it done. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him thinking, weighing my words. Makes sense, he said finally. Okay, Dad. One more thing, unlock the barn tomorrow morning. I need to check on something. My heart stopped. Check on what? On just some measurements. For a project I'm working on. Don't worry about it. Just leave it unlocked, okay? Sure, I said. My voice sounded hollow in my own ears. Great. See you on the 29th. He hung up. I stood in the hallway staring at the phone. He knew. Or he suspected. Or he was testing me. I couldn't tell which, and that terrified me more than anything. I called Detective Matthews. She answered on the second ring. Charles, what happened? I told her about Vincent's call, about the barn, about the way his voice had changed when he asked about the lawyer. She listened without interrupting. He's testing you, she said when I finished. Seeing if you'll panic. Don't. We move up the installation to tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Can you keep Nathan away from the property? I'll send him to Billings. Tell him I need supplies. Good. Stay calm, Charles. We're almost there. The next morning at 9, Matthews arrived with a white van that had no logo, no markings, nothing to identify it as law enforcement. A young officer climbed out with her. Matthews introduced him as Officer Parker, 28 tech specialist with the state police. He had short red hair and nervous hands that moved constantly, adjusting his glasses, checking his equipment. Mr. Donovan, he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, but his palm was sweating. We went to the barn. I unlocked it and pushed the heavy door open. The artifacts were still there under the canvas tarps, exactly where I had left them. Parker set down 2 large black cases and opened them. Inside were cameras, microphones, cables, batteries, and tools I didn't recognize. We'll place 3 cameras, Matthews explained, pointing to different locations. One in the rafters there, wide angle to catch the whole space. One on that beam focused on the door. One in the window frame backup angle. 2 microphones, one in the rafters, one behind that stack of crates. Parker worked quickly. He climbed a ladder and installed the first camera in the shadows of the rafters, a tiny device no bigger than a quarter. I watched him drill a small hole, feed a wire through, secure the camera, so it was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He did the same with the second and third cameras, then the microphones. The whole process took 2 hours. When he finished, Matthews pulled out a small tablet and showed me the feed. 4 different angles of the barn interior, all crystal clear. She tapped the screen, and I heard my own breathing amplified through the speakers. Perfect, she said. Now let's fit you with the wire. She handed me a device smaller than a button attached to a thin wire and a battery pack the size of a deck of cards. This clips under your shirt right here. Visual. She showed me positioning it at the center of my chest. The battery goes in your back pocket. It'll broadcast for 12 hours straight. When you speak, we hear everything. I put it on. It felt strange, foreign against my skin. I said, testing, 1, 2, 3. Matthews smiled. Loud and clear. By 2 in the afternoon, we were in my living room. Matthews sat across from me with a notebook. We need to rehearse. I'll play Vincent. You react the way you naturally would. She stood up, her face hardening. Dad, what the hell are these artifacts doing in your barn? I stared at her. I don't know, Vincent. You tell me. Don't play dumb. You've been snooping around, haven't you? I saw you loading bags. I heard you and Natalie talking. I know what you did to your mother. Matthews nodded. Good. That's when you say the code phrase. Margaret deserves to know the truth. We'll be listening. When we hear that we move in, 30 seconds, maybe less. What if they attack me? I asked. The question had been sitting in my chest since the night in the barn. What if Vincent realizes what's happening and things turn violent before you can get there? Matthews looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked to the van and came back carrying a shotgun. A Remington 870, the same model my father had owned. She set it on the table between us. Take this, she said. Keep it in the barn somewhere close but out of sight. If things go wrong, use it. Aim for the legs, not the chest. We want them alive. I picked up the shotgun. It was heavier than I remembered. I haven't fired a gun in 20 years. Then it's time to remember, Matthews said quietly. I don't think it'll come to that. But I'd rather you have it and not need it than the other way around. I nodded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows move across the plaster. At 2 in the morning, I gave up and sat by the window. The ranch was dark and silent under the stars. I thought about Vincent. Not the man he was now, but the boy he had been. 10 years old, summer riding horses with me across the eastern pasture. He had been small for his age, thin and serious, always trying to prove himself. We had stopped at the creek to let the horses drink, and he had looked up at me with Margaret's eyes. "Someday I'm going to make you proud, Dad," he had said. I had put my hand on his shoulder. "You already do, son." Now, sitting in the dark, I wiped my face with the back of my hand. Tears I hadn't known I was crying. "What happened to you?" I whispered. The morning of the 30th came too fast. I woke at 7, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans, and clipped the wire device under my shirt. My hands were shaking. I went to the barn, unlocked it, and stood in the cold silence. "I'm not testing," I said quietly. 1, 2, 3. Matthews's voice came through a tiny earpiece she had given me. "Loud and clear, Charles. We're in position. You're not alone." I walked to the corner where I had hidden the Remington 870 behind a stack of old wooden crates. I picked it up, checked the chamber, loaded 5 shells, and set it back down where I could reach it in 3 steps. Then I stood in the center of the barn, looking at the tarps that covered $5 million in stolen history. Tonight, at 11:45, Vincent would walk through that door with Natalie, with Derek, with Victoria. And one of us would leave in handcuffs. I didn't know which, but I was ready. If you're still here, comment 7 so I know you're still with me on this journey. And if you were in my place, after uncovering a truth this disturbing within your own family, would you stay silent to protect them? Or step forward and expose everything? Tell me what you would do. And before we continue, just a note, the next part includes some dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. If you'd rather not continue, you're free to stop here. The barn was colder than the house. I stood in the darkness at 11:30, my breath coming out in clouds that disappeared into the shadows above me. I could hear the wind moving through the gaps in the walls, the creak of old wood settling the scratch of a mouse somewhere in the rafters. I touched the wire device under my shirt. It was warm against my skin. "Testing," I whispered. Matthews's voice came through the tiny earpiece, clear and steady. "We hear you, Charles. 4 officers in position, 100 yards northeast in the tree line. You're not alone." But I felt alone. I walked to the corner where I had hidden the Remington 870 behind the wooden crates. I could reach it in 3 steps if I needed to. I hoped I wouldn't. At 11:40, I heard the first engine, distant but growing closer. My heart began to pound. I moved to the center of the barn, standing beneath the beam where Officer Parker had installed the camera. I wanted them to see me clearly. I wanted this on record. 2 sets of headlights swept across the barn walls. The engines cut. Doors opened and closed. I heard voices, Vincent's and others I didn't recognize. Footsteps on gravel. The barn door swung open. Vincent entered first, carrying a flashlight. Behind him came Natalie, then a woman in a dark coat I recognized from photographs, Victoria Ashford, the museum director. Last was a large man with broad shoulders and a cold expression. Derek Sullivan, head of security. Vincent's flashlight beam swept the interior and stopped on me. He froze. Then his voice cracked on the word. "What are you doing here?" I didn't move. "I could ask you the same thing, Vincent." Natalie grabbed his arm. "We need to leave," she whispered. "Now." But Vincent didn't move. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. The others filed in behind him, and Derek closed the barn door with a heavy thud that echoed in the space. I took a step forward. "What are you doing with these, I pointed at the canvas tarps covering the artifacts. Victoria spoke, her voice smooth and professional, the kind of voice used to handling difficult donors. "Mr. Donovan, this is just temporary storage. Museum inventory rotation. Nothing unusual." I looked past her, straight at Vincent. "Temporary storage for $5 million in stolen artifacts." Derek's hand moved to his hip. I saw the outline of a gun holster under his jacket. Vincent's face had gone pale. "Dad, you don't understand. Don't I?" I stepped closer. The wire device pressed against my chest. I knew Matthews was hearing every word. "Did you end my wife?" Silence fell over the barn. No one moved. No one spoke. The wind outside made the walls creak. Finally, Natalie spoke. Her voice was shaking. "It was an accident. She fell from the horse." I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Was it?" I pressed play. Natalie's voice filled the barn, tinny but clear, the recording I had made 3 nights ago in this exact spot. "Your mother knew too much about what we were doing. Derek was going to frame Nathan. What happened to her wasn't an accident." Then Vincent's voice, quieter but unmistakable. "I know." The recording stopped. I looked at the 4 faces in front of me. Victoria had gone rigid. Derek's jaw was clenched. Natalie had tears in her eyes, and Vincent looked like he might be sick. "Where did you get that?" Derek demanded. Vincent held up a hand. "Dad, I can explain." "Want to explain what?" My voice broke. "Explain that you ended your mother for money, that you let me believe it was an accident, that you stood at her grave and lied to my face. It wasn't like that." Derek stepped forward, his hand going to his gun. He pulled it out, a black Glock that looked enormous in the barn light. He pointed it at me. "Give me that phone," he said. "Now." I didn't move. My hands were shaking, but I held the phone tightly. Behind Derek, I saw Victoria moving toward the door. Running wasn't going to save them. Not tonight. Vincent moved faster than I expected. He stepped between Derek and me, pushing Derek's gun hand down. "Put the gun down." "That's my father." Derek's face twisted with anger. "He's got evidence. We're finished if he walks out of here with that recording." I said, "Put it down." Vincent's voice cracked like a whip. I had never heard him speak that way before, had never heard that tone of command. Derek hesitated, then slowly lowered the gun. But he didn't put it away. He kept it in his hand, pointed at the floor, his finger still near the trigger. Victoria spoke from behind them, her professional mask cracking. "Vincent, we need to contain this situation before—" I cut her off. I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to my son. "Why, Vincent?" My voice was shaking now, all the control I had been holding on to slipping away. "And why did you do it? She was your mother. She gave you life. She loved you more than anything in this world." "Why?" Vincent didn't answer. He stood there between Derek and me, his shoulders slumped, his head down. Natalie started to speak. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. We just needed her to stop asking questions. We thought if we talked to her, if we explained, 'Answer me, son.'" I took a step closer to Vincent. "Look at me and tell me why you took your mother from us." Vincent looked up. His eyes were red. Tears were streaming down his face, catching the dim light from Derek's flashlight. "I didn't mean for it to happen." His voice was barely above a whisper. "She was going to report us to the state police. Everything we'd worked for, everything we'd built, it was going to disappear. I just wanted to talk to her, to make her understand that we weren't hurting anyone, that the museum had insurance, that it didn't matter. But she wouldn't listen. She said," his voice broke. "She said she didn't raise a thief. She said she was ashamed of me." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "And then she tried to leave to go call someone, and I grabbed her arm. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to listen, but she pulled away, and the horse spooked, and—" He couldn't finish. I stood there looking at my son, the boy who had once promised to make me proud, the man who had ended his mother's life for money and pride. The son I loved was shattered, now broken into pieces I didn't know how to put back together. Vincent sank to his knees. His hands covered his face, and his shoulders shook. The barn was silent except for his ragged breathing and the wind outside. I owed money, he said, his voice muffled. Gambling debts. Real estate deals that went bad. $500,000 I didn't have. The bank was going to foreclose on everything. Natalie said the artifacts were the only way out. She said we could take them, sell them quietly, pay off the debts, and no one would know. He looked up at me, his face wet with tears. Mom found out. She was going to report us. Natalie said we had to stop her. She said there was no other way. I didn't want to. I swear to God, Dad, I didn't want to. But she kept saying Mom would ruin everything, that we'd lose the house, the business, everything we'd worked for. I stared down at my son on his knees on the barn floor. I had no words. Natalie stepped forward. The tears were gone from her eyes. Her voice was cold, flat, empty of emotion. I did what was necessary. Your wife was going to destroy us. She couldn't be reasoned with. She wouldn't listen. Did you end my wife? I asked. Natalie's mouth tightened. Derek did it. I just planned it. Derek spun toward her, his face twisted with rage. You told me Victoria ordered it. You said it came from the top. Victoria's eyes widened. I never said to, I never authorized. Liar, Derek shouted. You said make the problem disappear. They were turning on each other now, the alliance crumbling. I watched them, these four people who had conspired to end Margaret's life, now fighting like dogs over who was most responsible. Enough, I said quietly. They stopped. Derek was breathing hard, his hand still near his gun. Victoria had gone pale. Natalie stood with her arms crossed, defiant. I looked at Derek. Tell me exactly what happened. May 10th. The day my wife died. Derek's jaw clenched. He looked at Victoria, at Natalie, then back at me. Fine. You want the truth? We followed her that morning. She went riding like she did every Sunday out on the East Trail. Victoria said to make it look like an accident. No violence, no questions. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was describing a business transaction. I waited near the narrow part of the trail where the rocks are steep. When she came by, I spooked the horse. Just fired a starter pistol in the air. The horse panicked, reared up. She fell backward, hit her head on a rock. He paused. I checked. She wasn't breathing. It was over in seconds. My hands clenched into fists. My whole body was shaking. You ended someone for $4.8 million. Natalie sneered. It was $7 million before we had to pay Victoria's cut and move the pieces through private auction. Don't act like she was some saint. She was in our way. I took a step toward her. She was my wife. She was their mother. Natalie's eyes narrowed. And you're not walking out of here with that recording, old man. Derek's hand moved. The Glock came up again, this time steady, this time aimed directly at my chest. His finger was on the trigger. She's right, Derek said. I'm already going down for one. What's one more at this point? Vincent scrambled to his feet. No, don't, please, Derek, don't. But Derek didn't lower the gun. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing there. No hesitation, no doubt. I stood as straight as I could. I thought of Margaret. I thought of the truth she had tried to uncover. And I spoke clearly, every word echoing in the barn. Margaret deserves to know the truth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the barn doors exploded open. 5 flashlights hit us all at once, blinding white light that turned the darkness into noon. Detective Matthews's voice cut through the air like a blade. Montana State Police, drop the weapon now. 4 officers poured in behind her guns, drawn shouting commands. Get on the ground, hands where we can see them, do it now. Derek's gun clattered to the floor. He raised his hands, his face gone white. Natalie spun and ran toward the back door, but an officer was already there. He grabbed her arm and slammed her against the wall. Don't move, hands behind your back. Victoria stood frozen, her hands slowly rising. There's no evidence, she said, her voice shaking. You have nothing. This is all speculation. You can't. Matthews pointed up at the rafters. 3 cameras, 2 microphones. Officer Parker installed them yesterday. We have everything, every word, every confession. Victoria's face crumpled. Matthews pulled a card from her jacket pocket and began to read, her voice formal and steady. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. An officer grabbed Derek's wrists and pulled them behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut. Derek didn't resist. Another officer was cuffing Natalie, who was still struggling, still hissing curses under her breath. A third approached Victoria, who simply held out her wrists like she was accepting an inevitable sentence. Then an officer moved toward Vincent. He was still standing near me, his face blank with shock. Stand up straight, the officer said. Hands behind your back. Vincent turned to me. Tears were streaming down his face. Dad, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt her. You have to believe me. I turned my face away. I couldn't look at him. Dad, please. The officer pulled Vincent's hands back and cuffed them. The metal clicked shut. My son, in handcuffs. Dad, I heard footsteps running. Nathan burst through the barn door, pushing past an officer. Dad! He reached me and wrapped his arms around me. I felt my legs give out. Nathan held me up, his grip strong and steady. Vincent was being led toward the door. He turned back one last time, his eyes searching for mine. Dad, I didn't look. I couldn't. The officer guided him outside. Through the open barn door, I could see the flashing red and blue lights of police vehicles. I heard car doors opening and closing. Voices reading more rights. Engines starting. Nathan was holding me, but I felt like I was falling through space. Matthews approached, her expression somber. You did it, Charles, she said quietly. Your wife would be proud. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. Nathan helped me toward the barn entrance. I looked back once at the empty space where Vincent had knelt, where he had confessed, where he had cried. The artifacts were still there under their tarps. Evidence now. Proof of theft and conspiracy, and worse. The police vehicles were pulling away, carrying 4 people to jail. One of them was my son. I stood in the doorway of the barn and watched the red lights disappear down the long drive. Nathan stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. It's over, Dad, he said. But it wasn't over. Not really. I lost my wife 6 months ago to a lie. Tonight I lost my son to the truth. Margaret was gone. Vincent was gone. Our family was shattered. But the truth would not be buried. I hadn't slept. The sun came up on December 1st and found me sitting in the living room, staring at the television. The morning news was on. A young woman with a serious expression looked into the camera. Breaking news in Yellowstone County. 4 people, including the son of a local rancher, have been arrested in connection with the theft of artifacts worth nearly $5 million and the death of Margaret Donovan, who died 6 months ago in what was initially ruled a riding accident. Mugshots appeared on the screen. Vincent first, his face pale, his eyes red. Next to him, Natalie defiant. Then Derek blank and hard. Finally, Victoria composed and cold. Video footage played, police lights, the barn. Officers leading handcuffed suspects to cars. The reporter continued. Vincent Donovan, 38, is accused of involvement in his own mother's death. Authorities say the crime was motivated by financial gain. I pressed the power button. The screen went black. My phone rang immediately. Unknown number. Then another. Then another. Reporters, neighbors, distant relatives. I set the phone face down and listened to it vibrate. Nathan knocked and entered. Dad, there are news vans outside the gate. At least 5 of them. Close the curtains, I said. He did, pulling the fabric across until the room was dim. I sat in the half-darkness and heard Vincent's voice in my head. 10 years old, sitting on the porch. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'll be more careful next time." Then the voice from the barn. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Tears streaming, handcuffs around his wrists. I shook my head. Nathan was watching me. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said. At 2 in the afternoon, Detective Matthews arrived. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee. No one was drinking. "All 4 are being held without bail," Matthews said. "The judge ruled them flight risks." I nodded. I felt nothing. Vincent is charged with conspiracy to commit murder, grand theft, and obstruction. Natalie faces murder in the first degree and grand theft. Derek is charged with murder in the first degree and assault with a deadly weapon. Victoria faces conspiracy to commit murder, grand theft, and racketeering. She looked up. They're all looking at life sentences. Montana doesn't have the death penalty, but life without parole is on the table for Natalie and Derek. Nathan leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means they'll die in prison," Matthews said. "Unless something changes." I stared at my hands. "The prosecutor wants to offer Vincent a plea deal." Matthews continued. "If he testifies against the others, especially Victoria as the mastermind, they'll reduce his sentence. 25 years to life with possibility of parole." Nathan did the math. "He'll be 63 when he gets out." "If he gets out." Matthews turned to me. "It's your call, Charles. You're the victim's widower. Montana law allows victim families to provide input before plea deals are finalized. If you say no, they won't offer it." "What would you do?" I asked. "I can't answer that," she said gently. "This isn't my family." "I need time to think," I said. After Matthews left, Nathan and I sat in silence. The clock ticked. Nathan said finally. "We need to talk about Emma and Lucas." I stiffened. "They're in temporary foster care," Nathan continued. "Sarah Morrison, the social worker, called me this morning. They're confused, scared. They don't understand why their parents aren't coming home." "What did you tell her?" "That we need a few days. But Dad, they're asking for you. Emma especially. She keeps saying she wants to see Grandpa." I walked to the window. "I can't. Dad, I can't look at them without seeing him." My voice broke. "Emma has his eyes, Nathan. Lucas has his smile. Every time I see them, I'll remember what he did. They're innocent. They're just kids." "I know they are, but I'm not ready. I need time." Nathan nodded slowly. "Okay. I'll tell Sarah you need more time. But they're going to need us. Both of us. They've lost their parents. We're all they have left." "I know," I whispered. "Just not yet." That night I sat alone in my study. I opened my email. There was a message from Sarah Morrison. Subject: Emma and Lucas Donovan. Update. Mr. Donovan, I understand this is an incredibly difficult time. Emma 10 and Lucas 8 are staying with a foster family in Billings. They're safe but struggling emotionally. Emma asked me today if you're angry at her. Lucas hasn't spoken much since the arrest. They keep asking when they can see their grandfather. Please let me know when you're ready. They need family right now. Sarah Morrison, MSW. I read it 3 times. Then I opened the photo album on my phone. Emma and Lucas at the ranch last summer riding horses, smiling. Margaret was in the background. Emma looked exactly like Vincent had at that age. Lucas had Margaret's laugh. I typed a reply slowly. Ms. Morrison, please tell Emma that I am not angry at her or her brother. They did nothing wrong. I will come see them soon. I just need a little more time. Please take care of them. Charles Donovan. I hit send. It felt inadequate, but it was all I could manage. I walked to the bedroom. Margaret's wedding photo sat on the dresser. I picked it up and sat on the edge of the bed. What do you want me to do? I whispered. Do you want me to forgive him? He ended you. He took you from me, from Nathan, from those kids. How do I forgive that, The photo didn't answer. But he's still our son. And Emma and Lucas are still our grandchildren. They need me. I know they do. Tears blurred my vision. Do I forgive or do I hate? I don't know which one you'd want. I don't know which one I can live with. The room was silent. I set the photo on the nightstand and lay back on the bed staring at the ceiling. Forgive or hate? Mercy or justice? Family or truth? I didn't know. I still don't. 2 weeks passed, like a slow drowning. On December 15th, my phone rang while I sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee I couldn't taste. Mr. Donovan, this is David Brennan, Yellowstone County Prosecutor. Vincent has agreed to accept a plea deal. Second-degree murder for your wife's death plus grand theft and conspiracy. Sentencing range of 25 years to life in Montana State Prison, with possibility of parole in 2050. In exchange, he provides full testimony against Natalie Donovan, Victoria Ashford, and Derek Sullivan. I said nothing. The numbers meant nothing to me. 25 years. Vincent would be 63 years old if he ever got out. I would probably be dead. The alternative is a public trial. Brennan continued. That means months of proceedings, media coverage, and Mr. Donovan, Emma, and Lucas would likely be called to testify. They'd have to sit in a courtroom and hear every detail of how their grandmother died. At their ages, that kind of trauma can be devastating. My hand tightened on the phone. I don't want them to go through that. Then I strongly recommend accepting the plea. It's the best outcome we can realistically hope for. And what happens to the others? With Vincent's testimony, we're confident of life sentences without parole for both Natalie and Derek. Victoria will likely face 20 to 30 years. She'll die in prison either way. I need to think about it. I need an answer by end of day. I'm sorry to rush you. When Nathan came in from the barn, I told him about the call, about the plea deal, about Emma and Lucas and the choice I had to make. Nathan sat down across from me. 25 to life. That's a long time. Not long enough, I said. And too long. I don't know which. Nathan leaned forward. I think you should say yes. Not for Vincent. For Emma and Lucas. They shouldn't have to sit in court and relive this. They're just kids. He was right. I knew he was right. That afternoon, I called Brennan back. I agreed to the plea deal. Then I called Sarah Morrison. I'm ready to see Emma and Lucas, and I want to apply for custody. Permanent custody. There was a pause. Are you sure it's a big responsibility, Mr. Donovan? They're my grandchildren. They need family. All right. I'll start the paperwork. Can you come to Billings on Thursday the 18th? I'll be there. I spent the next 2 days preparing Vincent's old bedroom. I set up twin beds with new quilts. I bought clothes, toys, books. Nathan helped me paint the walls a soft blue. On Thursday afternoon, Nathan and I drove to Billings. The foster home was in a quiet neighborhood. Sarah Morrison was waiting outside. They're nervous, she told me. Emma's been asking about you every single day. Lucas hasn't spoken much since the arrest. We walked inside. Emma and Lucas were sitting on the couch in the living room. When Emma saw me, her face lit up. Grandpa, she jumped up and ran to me. I knelt down and she threw her arms around my neck. I held her tightly, feeling her small body shaking. Lucas stayed on the couch. He was watching me, his eyes wide and frightened. He looked so much like Vincent, it hurt. I held out my other arm. Lucas, come here, son. He hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, he walked over. I pulled both of them close. We stayed like that for a long time. All three of us were crying. Finally, Emma pulled back and looked up at me. Her eyes were red. Grandpa, did Dad end, Grandma? I felt Nathan stiffen behind me, but I knew I couldn't lie to her. Yes, sweetheart, I said quietly. He did. Emma's face crumpled. She started sobbing, her face pressed against my chest. Lucas made a small sound, tears streaming down his face, but he didn't say anything. I held them both. I'm so sorry you have to know that. I'm so sorry this happened to you. But I promise you something. I will not abandon you. You're going to come live with me and Uncle Nathan at the ranch. You'll have your own room. You'll be safe. I promise. Emma looked up at me, her face wet with tears. Forever. Forever, I said. Lucas spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. Can we bring our things? Everything, I said. We'll bring everything. An hour later, we were driving back to the ranch with Emma and Lucas in the back seat, their bags and boxes filling the truck bed. Emma sat quietly looking out the window. Lucas held a stuffed bear against his chest. Grandpa, Emma said. Yes, sweetheart. Will Dad ever come home? I glanced at Nathan. Not for a very long time, Emma. Many, many years. You'll be grown up by then. How long? A very long time. Lucas's small voice came from beside her. Is he in jail? Yes, I said. There was no point in lying. When we arrived at the ranch, I showed Emma and Lucas their new room. They stood in the doorway, looking at the twin beds, the blue walls, the toys on the shelves. This was Dad's room, Emma said, looking at an old photograph on the wall. A young Vincent, maybe 12 years old, holding a fishing rod. Yes, I said, when he was your age. Lucas walked over to one of the beds and touched the quilt. It's soft. That night, after a quiet dinner that neither of them ate much of, I tucked them into bed. Emma looked up at me from her pillow. Will you tell us a story? I sat down between the two beds and picked up an old book from the shelf. It was one I used to read to Vincent when he was small. I opened it and began to read about a brave knight and a kind princess. Emma fell asleep. First her breathing soft and even. Lucas fought it for a while, but eventually his eyes closed too. I sat there for a long time watching them sleep. Tears ran down my face. When I finally stood up and walked out, Nathan was waiting in the hallway. You did good, Dad, he said quietly. Really good. They asked if their father is coming home, I said. What am I supposed to tell them? Do the truth, Nathan said. Always the truth. They deserve that much. The next morning I walked out to the mailbox. There was a single envelope inside. The return address was Montana State Prison. The handwriting was Vincent's. I stood there holding it, my hands shaking. I walked back to the house and set it on the kitchen table. Nathan came in, saw it, and stopped. From Vincent, he asked. I nodded. Are you going to open it? I stared at the envelope. Inside were my son's words. Apologies, maybe. Explanations. Perhaps pleas for forgiveness or understanding. I don't know if I'm strong enough, I said. I sat down at the table. The letter lay between us, unopened. Not yet, maybe not ever. December 22nd came too fast. Nathan and I drove to the courthouse in silence. Media vans were parked outside, cameras ready. I pulled my coat tighter and kept my head down. I don't want to be here, I said. Nathan put his hand on my shoulder. I know. But you need to be. The courtroom was all wood paneling and Montana state seals. Judge Margaret Reed sat at the bench, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. Prosecutor Brennan was at his table. Defense attorneys shuffled papers. A few reporters sat in the back row with notebooks. I took a seat in the front. Nathan sat beside me. We waited. At 10:15, a door opened. Guards brought Vincent in. He wore an orange jumpsuit, handcuffs around his wrists, shackles around his ankles. He looked like a ghost of himself. Thinner, his beard had grown out unkempt and streaked with gray I'd never seen before. He was 38 years old, but looked 50. His eyes scanned the courtroom. They found me. I turned my face away and looked at the wall. Judge Reed's voice cut through the silence. Mr. Donovan, you understand you're here to enter a plea to the charges against you. Vincent's voice was hoarse. Yes, Your Honor. How do you plead to the charge of second-degree murder in the death of Margaret Donovan? A pause. Then, guilty. How do you plead to the charge of grand theft? Guilty. The word echoed in the courtroom. I closed my eyes. Judge Reed turned to the next defendant. Natalie was brought in, still wearing that defiant expression. Ms. Donovan, how do you plead? Natalie lifted her chin. Not guilty, Your Honor. I demand a trial. Judge Reed made a note. Trial is set for February 2026. Victoria Ashford was next. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy and grand theft. The judge sentenced her to 15 years. Then Derek Sullivan, who pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and assault with a deadly weapon. 20 years. Both were led away by guards, their faces blank. Then Judge Reed looked at me. The court will now hear victim impact statements. Nathan stood first. He walked to the podium, cleared his throat, and spoke. My mother, Margaret Donovan, was the kindest person I ever knew. She loved her family. She loved history and truth. Vincent took her from us for money and pride. 25 years is a long time for him to think about what he did. But it won't bring her back. It won't fix what he broke. He paused. That's all I have to say. He sat down. The judge turned to me. Mr. Donovan, I stood. My legs felt weak. I had written something down on paper, but when I reached the podium, the words seemed too small. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Vincent. He was staring at me, tears already streaming down his face. I began to read. The hardest thing about standing here today is that I'm Vincent's father. I raised him. I taught him right from wrong. I loved him. Part of me still does, and I hate myself for it. My voice cracked. I forced myself to continue. He ended my wife. He ended his mother. He destroyed our family for $5 million in stolen artifacts. But this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Margaret deserves justice. She deserves to be remembered as more than a victim. She was a good woman, a good wife, a good mother. I looked up from the paper straight at Vincent. I don't know if I'll ever forgive him. I don't know if I should. But I know he needs to face the consequences of what he did. I sat down. My hands were shaking. Tears were on my face, and I didn't bother wiping them away. Judge Reed was silent for a moment. Then she spoke. Vincent Donovan, you have pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the death of your mother, Margaret Donovan, and to grand theft. The court accepts your plea. She looked down at him. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years to life in the Montana State Prison. You will be eligible for parole consideration in the year 2050 when you are 63 years old. Whether you are granted parole at that time will depend on your conduct, your participation in rehabilitation programs, and the assessment of the parole board. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Vincent turned toward me. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I did. I'm sorry for Mom. I'm sorry for the pain. I'm sorry. I stood up. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit. Dad, please. His voice rose, desperate. Dad, just look at me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I pushed through the courtroom doors and kept walking until I was outside in the cold December air. Nathan caught up with me at the truck. He didn't say anything. He just got in and drove us home. When we arrived at the ranch, I checked the mailbox out of habit. There was an envelope inside. Montana State Prison. Vincent's handwriting. I stared at it. A second letter. I walked into the house. Emma and Lucas were still at school. Nathan had picked them up earlier and taken them to a friend's house so they wouldn't have to be home alone. I went to my study and opened the drawer where I'd put the first letter 3 days ago. It sat there unopened. I placed the second letter beside it. 2 envelopes. 2 chances for Vincent to explain himself, to apologize, to ask for something I didn't know if I could give. I closed the drawer and locked it. I'm not ready, I said to the empty room. Not yet. 2 days later, on Christmas Eve, Emma and Lucas decorated the tree in the living room. Nathan helped them string lights while I watched from the doorway. The tree twinkled with white lights and old ornaments, some of which had belonged to Margaret. Emma climbed a stepladder and placed an angel on top of the tree. This was Grandma's favorite rite. So yes, sweetheart, I said. Lucas was hanging a wooden reindeer on a low branch. Grandpa, will Dad come home next year? I walked over and knelt beside him. No, Lucas, not next year. Not for many, many years. Emma turned around, still on the ladder. Will we ever see him? Maybe someday, I said carefully. When you're older, if you want to. Lucas looked at me with his big, serious eyes. Can I send him a Christmas card? I was surprised. I looked at Nathan, who nodded slightly. Yes, I said. You can send him a card. Will you help me write it? I hesitated. I couldn't. Not yet. Uncle Nathan will help you. Lucas nodded and went back to hanging ornaments. That night, after Emma and Lucas were asleep, I sat alone in my study. I opened the locked drawer and looked at the 2 letters. The first postmarked December 19th, the second December 22nd, the day of the sentencing. Vincent's handwriting on both envelopes. Neat, careful, the same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and school reports for 38 years. I picked up the first letter, turned it over. My finger slid under the edge of the flap. Then I stopped. I set it down. There will be a day when I open them. When I'm ready to hear what he has to say. When I'm strong enough to face his words without breaking. When I can read his apologies and explanations without feeling like the world is ending all over again. I closed the drawer, locked it. But not today. Christmas morning arrived with the sound of small feet running down the hallway. I was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with coffee I hadn't touched. Grandpa, Grandpa, it's Christmas. Emma's voice rang through the house. I heard Nathan's door open, heard him laughing as Emma and Lucas dragged him toward the living room. I followed slowly. The tree was lit, ornaments catching the morning light. Emma and Lucas opened presents. Emma got a doll and books. Lucas got a red toy truck and colored pencils. Lucas looked up at me, his face glowing. This is the best Christmas ever. My heart broke. Last Christmas, Vincent and Natalie had been here. Margaret had been alive. We'd all sat around this same tree, laughing, drinking hot chocolate. In 5 months, Margaret would be gone. In 7 months, Vincent would be in prison. Emma hugged me. Thank you, Grandpa. I forced myself to smile. You're welcome, sweetheart. An hour later, Nathan was making pancakes. Emma and Lucas sat at the table chattering about presents. I set the table. 4 plates. I paused at the 5th chair. Margaret's chair. I left it empty. Nathan noticed but didn't say anything. We ate breakfast. The kids devoured their food. I picked at mine, managing only a few bites. Emma looked at me. Grandpa, are you okay? Just thinking about Grandma. She loved Christmas. Lucas set down his fork. I wish she was here. Me too, son. Nathan changed the subject. Who wants to build a snowman later? Emma and Lucas cheered. At 10 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. Mrs. Eleanor Carter, our neighbor, stood on the porch, holding a pie covered in foil. She was 72, a widow with white hair and kind eyes. Merry Christmas, Charles. She held out the pie. I heard about everything. The trial. Vincent. I'm so sorry. Margaret was a wonderful woman. I made her favorite apple pie, the recipe she gave me years ago. I took the pie. It was still warm. The smell of cinnamon and apples hit me, and I was suddenly back in this kitchen 10 years ago, watching Margaret roll out dough flour on her hands, laughing. My eyes filled with tears. She'd be happy you remembered. Mrs. Carter touched my arm. If you need anything, groceries, someone to watch the kids, you call me. You're not alone. After she left, I sat at the table holding the pie, crying quietly. Nathan found me. Dad, I'm okay. People are just kind. That afternoon, we walked around the ranch. Snow covered the field's mountains in the distance, sharp against a bright blue sky. Emma and Lucas ran ahead. Lucas threw a snowball at Emma. She shrieked with laughter and threw one back. Within minutes, they were chasing each other, laughing. Nathan and I stood watching. "They're going to be okay," he said. They're laughing. 2 weeks ago, Emma was sobbing in my arms. The kids recover fast. They're resilient. Maybe someday I will too. Nathan looked at me. "You're doing better than you think. You got out of bed. You made it through Christmas. That's something." Emma called from across the field. "Grandpa, come play." I shook my head. I'm too old for snowball fights. But I smiled. A small smile, but real. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I opened the local newspaper and found a small article on page 7. Museum employee terminated following artifact theft scandal. Melissa Porter, 24, had been fired for failure to report suspicious activity. I felt anger rise. She had helped me. She had given me evidence. Without her, Victoria and Derek might never have been caught. I found her number and called. Mr. Donovan." She sounded tired. Melissa. "I just read about the museum. I'm sorry. You did the right thing." Her voice was thick with tears. "They fired me. They said I should have reported it sooner. But I was scared. Victoria was my boss. You were brave. You helped bring justice for Margaret. Don't let them make you feel otherwise." There was a pause. "Mrs. Donovan would be really proud of you. What you did for your grandkids. How you stood up in court." My voice broke. "Thank you." After I hung up, I sat there staring at the wall, crying again. Not desperate, broken crying. Just quiet tears for everything lost and everything being rebuilt. 3 days later, on Saturday morning, I found another envelope in the mailbox. Montana State Prison. Vincent's handwriting. The third letter. I carried it to my study and unlocked the drawer. 2 letters already there. December 19th. December 22nd. Now December 28th. I placed the third beside the others. Nathan appeared in the doorway. "Another one?" I nodded. "Aren't you curious about what he's saying?" "I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of forgiveness. If I read his words, if I hear his explanations, I might start to understand. And if I understand, I might forgive. And I'm not ready to forgive him. I'm afraid that if I forgive him, I'll be betraying Margaret." Nathan was quiet. Then he said, "Forgiveness isn't betrayal, Dad. It's freedom." "Maybe, but not yet." I closed the drawer and locked it. That evening, I walked alone to Margaret's grave. The sun was setting, painting the snow pink and gold. I knelt beside the headstone and brushed snow off the carved words. I talked to her. "The kids are doing okay. Lucas sent Vincent a Christmas card. Emma asks about you every day. Nathan's been amazing." The wind moved through the pines. I don't know what to do about the letters. 3 of them now. Part of me wants to burn them. Part of me wants to know what he's saying. The sky was darkening. New Year's coming. 2026. The first full year without you. I don't know if I can forgive him. Maybe someday. But not now. Is that okay? Am I allowed to hold on to this anger? The wind was my only answer. "I miss you," I whispered. "Every single day." I stood slowly and walked back toward the house. As I approached, I saw lights in the living room windows. I stopped and looked through the glass. Emma, Lucas, and Nathan were playing Monopoly on the floor. Emma had just landed on Nathan's property and was pretending to be outraged. Lucas was giggling. Nathan was grinning. "That's $50, Emma." I stood outside in the cold watching them. Something shifted in my chest. I smiled. A small smile, barely there, but genuine. The first real smile in 7 months since Margaret died. I opened the door and walked inside. Emma looked up. Grandpa, come play, I'm losing. Okay, deal me in. I sat down beside Lucas. Nathan handed me the dice. I rolled them and moved my piece. For the first time in months, I felt something other than grief. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from what Vincent did. I don't know if the hole Margaret left will ever be filled. I don't know if I'll read those letters tomorrow or next week or never, but I'm starting to live again. For these kids. For Nathan. For myself. Maybe that's enough for now. I sat in my study on the morning of December 29th, staring at the calendar on the wall. 2 more days. 2 more days, and this year would be over. 7 months ago, Margaret was alive. I could trace the timeline in my head, like a wound that wouldn't heal. May 2025, Margaret died. I thought it was an accident. I grieved, but I believed she'd simply fallen from her horse. November 2025. I discovered the truth. My son had been involved in her death. Late November, the arrests. The barn confrontation. Vincent in handcuffs. December 22nd, the sentencing. Vincent taken to prison for 25 years to life. December 25th, Christmas with Emma and Lucas. 7 months. It felt like 7 years. It felt like 7 minutes. Nathan came into the study carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on my desk and sat down in the chair across from me. How do you feel about the new year? I looked up at him. I don't know. We lost so much this year, but we gained something too, Nathan said quietly. Emma and Lucas. A second chance to be a family. I suppose. Are you going to make any resolutions? I let out a bitter laugh. Like what, forgive my son for ending my wife? Nathan didn't answer right away. Then he said, maybe just keep living. That's enough. He left and I went back to staring at the calendar. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I heard the mail truck pass. I walked out to the mailbox and found another envelope inside. Montana State Prison. Vincent's handwriting. The third letter. Postmarked December 26th, the day after Christmas. I carried it inside and went to my study. I unlocked the drawer and took out the first 2 letters. December 19th, December 22nd. I placed all 3 on the desk in a row. 3 envelopes. 3 chances to hear Vincent's voice. 3 opportunities for what reconciliation, understanding, more pain. My hand hovered over the first letter. Then I pulled it back. A memory came to me sudden and sharp. It was spring of 2024, over a year ago. Margaret and I were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. We'd been talking about something we'd seen on the news, a family torn apart by betrayal. Margaret had turned to me, her expression thoughtful. Charles, if something ever happens to me, I'd interrupted her. Don't talk like that, but she'd insisted. Listen, if something happens to me, I don't want you to live in hatred. Life's too short. Anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Where did you hear that? I'd asked. She'd smiled. I don't remember. But it's true, isn't it? I sat at my desk, now tears running down my face. Had she known? Had she sensed something was coming? Don't live in hatred. That evening, I stood by the window watching Emma and Lucas build a snowman in the yard with Nathan. They were laughing, packing snow with their mittened hands, their breath making clouds in the cold air. Would Margaret want me to forgive Vincent? I remembered her kindness, her capacity for forgiveness when I was stubborn and wrong, her gentle insistence that holding grudges only hurt the person holding them. But Vincent had ended her. How could I forgive the person who took her from me? But she told me not to live in hatred. I whispered to my reflection in the window. Emma waved at me from the yard. I waved back mechanically, my mind somewhere else entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 11 o'clock, I gave up trying. I dressed warmly and walked outside. The ranch was silver and blue under the moonlight. Snow covered everything, glowing pale in the darkness. The cold air burned my lungs with each breath, turning it to mist. I walked across the empty fields toward the grove of pines where Margaret was buried. Her headstone stood quiet under the moon. Snow had drifted against it. I knelt down, ignoring the protest from my knees, and brushed the snow away from the carved words. "Margaret," I said quietly. "I don't know what to do." The wind moved through the pines above me. "He ended you. I should hate him forever. Part of me does. But he's still my son. And Emma and Lucas, they need something. Even if it's just letters from a father in prison. Even if it's just knowing he's still thinking about them." I paused, gathering my thoughts. Should I read them? Should I let his words into my heart? I'm afraid if I do, I'll soften. I'll start to understand. And if I understand, maybe I'll forgive. And then what am I betraying you if I forgive him? The wind picked up colder now, cutting through my coat. The pines whispered and swayed. I closed my eyes, and I felt something. Not a voice, not words. Just a sense, a feeling that settled over me like warmth despite the cold. I remembered her words. Don't live in hatred. It felt like she was answering me. Do what your heart tells you is right. But what if my heart doesn't know? I whispered. The wind continued. No more answers came. Just the cold and the dark and the snow. I stood slowly, stiff from kneeling, and walked back to the house. I woke the next morning at 7. The decision had solidified overnight, settling into my chest, like something heavy but necessary. Today, I would read the first letter. I went to my study before Nathan or the kids were awake. I took the first letter from the desk, the one postmarked December 19th, 9 days after the arrests, and sat down by the window. Outside, snow was falling gently. The world was quiet. I held the envelope in my hands. It didn't weigh much. Maybe 2 pages inside. I thought about what might be written there. Apologies, explanations, excuses. Pleas for forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. Or maybe just words from a man sitting in a prison cell, trying to reach across the distance to a father who had turned his back. I didn't know what this would change. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I knew one thing with certainty. If I didn't do this, I would carry the question for the rest of my life. What did he say? What could he possibly say? I took a deep breath. My finger slid under the edge of the envelope flap. I tore it slowly, the sound loud in the quiet room. I pulled out 2 folded pages covered in Vincent's careful handwriting. I unfolded them. The first word was Dad. I began to read. My eyes moved across the first line of the letter. Dad, I don't know where to start. Vincent's handwriting was shaky, uneven, nothing like the confident script I remembered from birthday cards and school reports. Some of the words were smudged as if water had fallen on the page while he wrote. Or tears. I've tried writing this letter a dozen times, and every time I crumple it up and throw it away because nothing I say can possibly be enough. Nothing I write can undo what I did. But I have to try. I have to tell you. The letter was dated December 19th, 2 days after the sentencing. He must have written it from the county jail before they transferred him to the Montana State Prison. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. I just need you to know that every single day in here I think about Mom. Every night I lie awake on this hard bunk and I see her face. I hear her voice. I remember the last conversation we had, the last thing she said to me before. Before what I did, I stopped reading. My hand was trembling so badly the paper rattled. I set the letter down on the desk and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Then I picked it up again. She said she loved me. She said she was proud of me even though I'd made mistakes. She said there was always time to make things right. And I ended her. I took her from you. From Nathan, from Emma and Lucas. From everyone who loved her. The words hit me like a physical blow. I closed my eyes, but the tears came anyway, hot and burning. The guards here think I'm weak because I cry every night. They mock me. They call me names. Let them think what they want. Let them say what they want. I deserve worse than their judgment. I deserve everything that's coming to me. I could picture him. Orange jumpsuit, concrete walls, metal bars, lying on a narrow bunk in the dark, listening to the sounds of other prisoners crying where no one who loved him could see. I'm not writing to make excuses, Dad. There are no excuses for what I did. Greed, pride, fear of losing everything I'd built. None of it matters now. None of it ever mattered. What matters is that Mom is gone and it's my fault. My choice. My hands. I can't wash them clean no matter how many times I try. My vision blurred completely. Tears were falling onto the page, now mixing with the smudges that were already there, blurring Vincent's careful handwriting. But Dad, I need you to know something. I still love you. I know I have absolutely no right to say that to you. I know I destroyed our family. I know I took away the woman you loved. But it's true. I love you. I always have. Even when I was doing terrible things, even when I was lying to you, I loved you. That doesn't make it better. It probably makes it worse. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and forced myself to keep reading. And if Emma and Lucas ask about me, and I know they must, they're so young, please don't tell them I'm a monster. I know that's what I am. I know that's what I deserve to be called, but they're children. They don't need to carry that weight. Tell them I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake anyone could possibly make. But tell them I'm still their father. Tell them I love them more than anything in this world. Tell them that even though I'll be gone for most of their lives, locked away in this place, I think about them every single day. I pray for them every night, even though I don't know if God listens to people like me anymore. I thought about Lucas 2 days ago, asking if he could send Vincent a Christmas card. Emma asking if they would ever see their father again. Their small faces full of confusion and hurt and love they didn't know what to do with. They didn't know what was in this letter. They didn't know their father was sitting in a prison cell, crying every night, begging me not to turn him into a monster in their eyes. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect you to visit me here. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding or anything at all. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For Mom, for the lies, for the pain, for everything. I love you, Dad. Vincent, I finished reading and set the letter down on the desk, as carefully as if it were made of glass. My hands were shaking. Tears were running down my face and dripping onto the wood. I didn't bother wiping them away. I sat there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20, staring at the pages, at my son's shaky handwriting, at the words that couldn't fix anything, that couldn't bring Margaret back, that couldn't undo 7 months of grief, but that somehow made everything hurt in a different way. I looked out the window. Emma and Lucas were in the yard with Nathan building a snowman. Emma was laughing, trying to lift a big snowball onto the snowman's body. Lucas was packing snow around the base with his small, mittened hands. Nathan was helping his breath making clouds in the cold Montana air. They looked happy, innocent, unaware that their father had written this letter from behind bars. There was a knock on the study door. Nathan came in slowly. He saw me sitting there with tears on my face and the letter spread out on the desk. He stopped in the doorway. "That you read it," I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. Nathan waited. He didn't push. He didn't ask what the letter said. He just stood there patient, giving me time. Finally, I found my voice. It came out rough and shaking. He said he doesn't ask for forgiveness. He just asks that I don't forget he still loves me. And he asked me not to tell Emma and Lucas that he's a monster. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you believe him, that he's sorry?" "I don't know." I looked down at the letter again. But I think the Vincent who wrote this letter is broken. Truly, completely broken. Not the man who ended Margaret. Someone different. Someone who finally understands the magnitude of what he did. What are you going to do? I was silent for a long time. The question hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible. Then I said, I need to see him. Once. Face to face. To look him in the eyes and say what needs to be said. Whatever that is. I don't know yet. When? Tomorrow. December 31st. The last day of the year. And then I'll start the new year with or without Vincent in my life. Either way, I'll have said what I need to say. Nathan nodded slowly. Do you want me to come with you? No. Thank you, but no. This is something I have to do alone. I folded the letter carefully, creasing it along the original lines, and slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I stood up and put the coat on. Nathan watched me with concerned eyes. Where are you going now? I need some time alone. I need to drive. I need to think. Okay, take all the time you need. The kids and I will be here when you get back. I walked out to my truck parked in the driveway and climbed in. The engine started with its familiar rumble. I backed down the long gravel drive and turned onto the highway heading south. I wasn't driving toward the Montana State Prison. Not yet. That would be tomorrow, on the last day of this terrible year. Today I was driving to another place. A place I hadn't been able to face since May. A place I'd been avoiding for 7 months. Because it hurt too much to go there. Because seeing it would make everything real in a way I wasn't ready for. I was driving to the place where it all began. The trail where Margaret died. The truck bumped along the old logging road until I reached the trailhead. I parked and sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the path that disappeared into the trees. This was the East Trail. The one Margaret rode every Sunday morning. The one where she died. I hadn't been here in 7 months. I got out of the truck and started walking. The path was narrow, hemmed in by pines on both sides. Snow crunched under my boots. To my right, the ground dropped away steeply, rocky, and dangerous. I remembered walking this trail with Margaret years ago, her laughing and saying it was beautiful, but you had to respect it. I passed landmarks I recognized. The bent pine struck by lightning, the split boulder. Each step felt heavier than the last. Then I reached the narrow section. The place Derek had described in his confession. Where he'd fired the starter pistol. Where Margaret's horse had panicked and reared. I saw the rock. It was large gray, jutting out from the steep slope at an awkward angle. Sharp edges worn smooth in some places, but still brutal. This was where she fell. Where her head struck. Where she died. I knelt down beside it and put my hand on the cold stone. I'm here, I whispered. I couldn't come before. I'm sorry it took so long. The wind moved through the pines above me, making them whisper. They staged it. Derek spooked your horse. You fell. You hit this rock. And you were gone. Just like that. One moment you were alive and the next you weren't. My throat tightened. One Vincent knew. He planned it. He let it happen because he was afraid of losing money and pride and all the things that don't matter at all. I sat down on a smaller rock nearby, still looking at the spot where Margaret died. I read his letter. He says he thinks about you every day. He cries every night in his cell. I don't know if that matters. Does it matter to you? Silence. Just the wind and the cold. I'm going to see him tomorrow. Not to forgive him. I'm not ready for that. Maybe I never will be. But to close this chapter. To say goodbye to the son I thought I knew. The boy I raised. And to accept the man he's become. I closed my eyes and felt something. Not a voice. Not words. Just a sense of her presence, the way you feel someone standing behind you even when you can't see them. I stood up slowly and walked back to the truck. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to the barn. The barn where everything had ended. where Vincent and Natalie and Derek and Victoria had been caught, where I'd confronted my son and watched police take him away in handcuffs. I sat in the truck for a long moment staring at the closed barn door. Then I got out. The door creaked when I opened it. The sound was loud in the silence. Inside the barn was empty. Completely empty. The artifacts had been returned to the museum weeks ago, evidence photographed and processed. All that remained was dust and shadows, and the ghosts of that terrible night. I stood in the center where I'd stood on November 30th. I looked at the spot where Vincent had knelt, crying, his face wet with tears and shame. I looked at the corner where Derek had pulled his gun and aimed it at my chest. I looked at the door where Detective Matthews and her officers had rushed in with flashlights and shouting. Voices echoed in my mind. Vincent's voice, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Natalie's voice, "Your mother knew too much." Derek's voice, "I followed Victoria's orders," and my own voice, "Margaret deserves to know the truth." I sat down on the barn floor. It was cold and hard beneath me. I spoke aloud to the empty space as if Vincent could somehow hear me across the miles. "Vincent, I'm here, at the place where I lost you, where I chose justice over protecting you. I don't regret that choice. I can't. Margaret deserved justice. She deserved the truth." My voice echoed slightly in the empty barn. "But I can't hate you. I've tried. God knows I've tried to hate you the way you deserve to be hated. But you're still my son. That love doesn't just disappear. It changes. It breaks. It becomes something twisted and painful. But it doesn't vanish." I pulled the letter from my coat pocket and held it. "I read your letter. I know you're broken. I know you cry every night. Part of me is glad about that. Part of me wants you to suffer the way I've suffered, the way Margaret suffered in her last moments. But another part of me, a part I don't fully understand, just aches for you." The barn was silent. "John, tomorrow I'm coming to see you at the prison. Not to forgive you. I'm not ready for that, and I don't know if I ever will be. But to say goodbye. To the boy you were. To the man I thought you'd become. And to accept the man you actually are." I stood up, my knees protesting. "Emma and Lucas ask about you. Lucas sent you a Christmas card. I haven't told them you're a monster. I tell them you made a terrible, unforgivable mistake, because they need to believe their father was human. Even if he did something monstrous." I walked toward the door, my footsteps loud on the wooden floor. "I don't know what happens after tomorrow. Maybe I'll visit you again someday. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll forgive you eventually. Maybe I won't. But I need to look you in the eyes one more time. I need to see who you've become." I left the barn and closed the door behind me. By the time I got home, it was 2 in the afternoon. Nathan was in the kitchen making lunch. He saw me come in and looked at my face, but didn't ask where I'd been. He just nodded. At 6 o'clock, we sat down for dinner. Nathan, Emma, Lucas, and me. The kids were excited, chattering about staying up until midnight to watch the new year arrive. Emma wanted to make noise with pots and pans. Lucas wanted to set off fireworks, even though it was too cold and too snowy. I sat quietly, picking at my food. Emma noticed. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "Just thinking about tomorrow, sweetheart." "What's tomorrow?" Lucas asked. "Just something I have to do." Nathan caught my eye across the table. He understood. He gave me a small nod. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. I thought about 2025. The year that had taken everything and given me something I didn't know I needed. I lost Margaret in May. Lost her to a lie that I believed for 6 months. I discovered the truth in November. Found out my son had been involved in her death. I lost Vincent to prison in December. Watched him sentenced to 25 years to life, but I gained Emma and Lucas. 2 children who needed me as much as I needed them. This year took my wife and my son, but it gave me a reason to keep living, a reason to get out of bed, a reason to smile again, even if the smile was small and hard-won. Tomorrow would be the last day of 2025, the last day of this terrible, necessary year. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under and I slept. I woke at 6 in the morning on December 31st. The house was still dark and quiet. I got out of bed and went to the closet. I pulled out my suit. Dark gray, well-made, the one I'd worn to Margaret's funeral and hadn't touched since. I put on a white shirt, buttoned it carefully, added the vest. My hands shook as I tried to knot the tie. It took 3 attempts to get it right. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The face looking back was gaunt, tired, older than 68. My beard had grown in over the past weeks, streaked with gray and white. I picked up the razor and started shaving. Slowly, carefully. The blade scraped across my skin. I cut myself once, a small nick on my jaw. A drop of blood appeared. I wiped it away and kept going. When I finished, I washed my face and looked in the mirror again. I barely recognized myself. 7 months had carved lines into my face that hadn't been there before. But my eyes were clear, determined. Today, I would go to the Montana State Prison. Today, I would see Vincent face to face for the first time since the sentencing. Today, I would close this chapter. But standing there in my suit, looking at myself in the mirror, I felt fear coil in my chest. I don't know if I can look into his eyes without falling apart. I left the ranch at 8 in the morning and drove north toward the prison. The highway was empty, snow-covered fields stretching out on both sides, mountains rising in the distance. I kept the radio off. The only sound was the hum of the engine and my own breathing. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. I kept rehearsing what I would say, but every time I tried to form the words, they evaporated. 2 hours later, I pulled up to the Montana State Prison. Gray concrete walls, barbed wire, guard towers. It looked exactly like what it was, a place where people went to pay for terrible things. I parked and walked to the visitor entrance. A guard checked my ID, had me empty my pockets, walk through a metal detector. I sat in the waiting room with other visitors, mothers, wives, young children, who didn't understand why their fathers lived behind walls. A guard called my name, Charles Donovan. I followed him down a long corridor. My heart was pounding. He led me into a small room divided by a thick glass partition. I sat down on one side and picked up the phone receiver mounted on the wall. A door opened on the other side of the glass. Another guard brought Vincent in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked thinner. His beard was trimmed short. His eyes were red like he hadn't been sleeping. He sat down across from me and picked up his phone. We looked at each other through the glass. 30 seconds passed. Neither of us spoke. It felt like an eternity. Then Vincent's eyes filled with tears. His voice came through the phone, shaking. "Dad, you actually came because you're my son," I said. "I can't completely abandon you." Vincent broke down. Tears streamed down his face. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad." I kept my voice steady, cold. "You should hate yourself for the rest of your life, Vincent. That's what you deserve." He nodded, unable to speak, tears falling onto his orange jumpsuit. I continued. "But Emma and Lucas need a father. Even if it's just through letters, even if it's just knowing you're thinking about them. I'll allow them to write to you. Maybe someday when they're older, and if they want to, I'll bring them here to see you." Vincent looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Really, you'd do that?" "Not for you," I said. "For them." Silence. Then Vincent asked the question I knew was coming. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, do you hate me?" I thought about it for a long time. I chose my words carefully. "I hate what you did. I hate that you took Margaret from me. I hate that you chose money and pride over your mother's life. But the love I have for you doesn't disappear just because I want it to." I don't hate you, Vincent, but I haven't forgiven you either, and I may never forgive you. The truth is, I still love you, even though it hurts, even though I wish I didn't." Vincent was crying harder now, his shoulders shaking. "I don't deserve that," Manoin, I said. "You don't." "Thank you for coming," he whispered. I stood up. Vincent stood too. We both put our hands on the glass fingertips aligned through the barrier. We couldn't actually touch, but the gesture said everything that words couldn't. And "Goodbye, Vincent." "Goodbye, Dad." I hung up the phone, turned, and walked out. The sun was high in the sky when I left the prison. I drove away and watched it shrink in my rearview mirror until it disappeared. At 2 o'clock, I pulled over at an overlook near the ranch. I could see Margaret's grave in the distance, a small stone beneath the pine trees. I spoke to her, even though she wasn't there to hear. I saw him. I didn't forgive him, but I didn't abandon him either. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it's all I can do. The wind was cold. The sky was clear. I got back in the truck and drove home. I pulled into the driveway at 6 in the evening. Emma and Lucas ran out to meet me. "Grandpa, you're home." I hugged them both, holding them tight. Nathan stood in the doorway. He didn't ask where I'd been. He just nodded. Inside, the fireplace was lit. The Christmas tree was still up, lights twinkling. Nathan had made dinner. Emma and Lucas had decorated the house with streamers for New Year's Eve. We sat together and ate quietly. After dinner, I sat by the fireplace and looked at Margaret's photograph on the mantel. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward midnight. People ask me if I forgave my son. I don't know. Maybe someday, maybe never. But justice was served. Margaret has the truth, and Emma and Lucas have a future. I have memories of my wife, a family to protect, and a question I may carry for the rest of my life: can love survive betrayal? I don't have the answer, but I have time. I'm living, I'm loving, I'm remembering. Today I'm just alive, and maybe that's enough. The camera pulls back. Charles sits by the fireplace. Emma and Lucas are playing a board game on the floor. Nathan pours coffee in the kitchen. The image shifts to Charles's study. The desk drawer is slightly open. Inside, 2 letters are visible, still unopened. The screen fades to black. Text appears. Billings, Montana. New Year's Eve. December 31st, 2025. Sitting here looking back at this painful journey, I want to tell you, don't be like me. Don't let greed, silence, or fear obscure the truth. I lost Margaret because I didn't see the warning signs from my own son. I loved Vincent too blindly, and now I must live with the consequences for the rest of my life. This isn't just a family story about betrayal, it's a warning. This is one of those grandpa stories I wish I never had to tell. But if my story can help someone recognize the truth before it's too late, then this pain has meaning. The lesson: justice and love sometimes must walk side by side, even when they contradict each other. You can love someone and still hold them accountable. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means you choose to keep living instead of dying slowly in hatred. I believe God gives us these trials not to break us, but to show us what we're made of. Emma and Lucas are my second chance, my reason to wake up each morning. This family story taught me that healing doesn't mean the wound disappears. It means you learn to carry it without letting it destroy you. These grandpa stories we pass down aren't always about heroes and happy endings. Sometimes they're about ordinary people facing impossible choices. My family story is messy, unfinished, and painful, but it's real. That's why I share these grandpa stories, not to glorify suffering, but to remind you that truth matters more than comfort. My advice: speak the truth even when it costs you everything. Protect the innocent even when it means losing those you love. And never ever let silence become your enemy. Thank you for walking with me to the end of this journey. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What would you do if you found yourself in this character's situation, facing this moral dilemma? I genuinely want to hear your perspective. If this story resonated with you emotionally, please consider subscribing so you won't miss future content. A gentle note: while inspired by real-life events, social issues, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content doesn't align with your preferences, feel free to explore other videos that might suit you better. Important: I've shifted the narrative perspective and framed the variables throughout. You must change the bracketed content for each video to avoid industrial spam flags.